Chapter 28. Snape's Worst Memory. By order of the Ministry of Magic, Dolores Jane Umbridge, High Inquisitor, has replaced Albus Dumbledore as head of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The above is in accordance with Educational Decree Number 28, signed Cornelius Oswald Fudge, Minister of Magic. The notices had gone up all over the school overnight, but they did not explain how every single person within the castle seemed to know that Dumbledore had overcome two Aurors, the High Inquisitor, the Minister of Magic, and his junior assistant to escape. No matter where Harry went within the castle the next day, the sole topic of conversation was Dumbledore's flight, and though some of the details might have gone awry in the retelling, Harry overheard one second-year girl assuring another that Fudge was now lying in St. Mungo's with a pumpkin for a head. It was surprising how accurate the rest of their information was. Everybody seemed aware, for instance, that Harry and Marietta were the only students to have witnessed the scene in Dumbledore's office. And as Marietta was now in the hospital wing, Harry found himself besieged with requests to give a first-hand account wherever he went. "Dumbledore will be back before long," said Ernie Macmillan confidently on the way back from herbology after listening intently to Harry's story. "They couldn't keep him away in our second year, and they won't be able to this time. The Fat Friar told me." He dropped his voice conspiratorially so that Harry, Ron, and Hermione had to lean closer to him to hear that Umbridge tried to get back into his office last night after they'd searched the castle and grounds for him. Couldn't get past the gargoyle. The head's office has sealed itself against her. Ernie smirked. Apparently, she had a right little tantrum. "Oh, I expect she really fancied herself sitting up there in the head's office," said Hermione viciously as they walked up the stone steps into the entrance hall, "lording it over all the other teachers. That stupid, puffed-out, power-crazy old—" "Now, do you really want to finish that sentence, Granger?" Draco Malfoy had slid out from behind the door, followed by Crabbe and Goyle. His pale, pointed face was alight with malice. "Afraid I'm going to have to dock a few points from Gryffindor and Hufflepuff," he drawled. "It's only teachers that can dock points from houses, Malfoy," said Ernie at once. "Yeah, we're prefects too, remember?" snarled Ron. "I know prefects can't dock points, Weasel King," sneered Malfoy. Crabbe and Goyle sniggered. "But members of the Inquisitorial Squad—" "The what?" said Hermione sharply. "The Inquisitorial Squad, Granger," said Malfoy, pointing toward a tiny silver eye upon his robes, just beneath his prefect's badge. "A select group of students who are supportive of the Ministry of Magic, handpicked by Professor Umbridge. Anyway, members of the Inquisitorial Squad do have the power to dock points. So, Granger, I'll have 5 from you for being rude about our new headmistress. Macmillan 5 for contradicting me. 5 because I don't like you, Potter. Weasley, your shirt's untucked, so I'll have another 5 for that. Oh, yeah, I forgot, you're a mudblood, Granger, so 10 for that." Ron pulled out his wand, but Hermione pushed it away, whispering, "Don't." "Wise move, Granger," breathed Malfoy. "New head, new times. Be good now, Potty, Weasel King." He strode away laughing heartily with Crabbe and Goyle. "He was bluffing," said Ernie, looking appalled. "He can't be allowed to dock points. That would be ridiculous. It would completely undermine the prefect system." But Harry, Ron, and Hermione had turned automatically toward the giant hourglass set in the niches along the wall behind them, which recorded the house points. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw had been neck and neck in the lead that morning. Even as they watched, stones flew upward, reducing the amounts in the lower bulbs. In fact, the only glass that seemed unchanged was the emerald-filled one of Slytherin. "Noticed, have you?" said Fred's voice. He and George had just come down the marble staircase and joined Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ernie in front of the hourglass. "Malfoy just docked us about 50 points, said Harry furiously as they watched several more stones fly upward from the Gryffindor hourglass. "Yeah, Montague tried to do us during the break," said George. "What do you mean, tried?" said Ron quickly. "He never managed to get all the words out," said Fred, "due to the fact that we forced him headfirst into that vanishing cabinet on the first floor." Hermione looked very shocked. "But you'll get into terrible trouble." "Not until Montague reappears, and that could take weeks." "I don't know where we sent him," said Fred coolly. "Anyway, we decided we don't care about getting into trouble anymore." "Have you ever?" asked Hermione. "Course we have," said George. "Never been expelled, have we?" "We've always known where to draw the line," said Fred. "We might have put a toe across it occasionally," said George, "but we were always stopped short of causing real mayhem," said Fred. "But now?" said Ron tentatively. "Well, now," said George. "Well, with Dumbledore gone," said Fred. "We reckon a bit of mayhem," said George, "is exactly what our new head deserves," said Fred. "You mustn't," whispered Hermione. "You really mustn't. She'd love a reason to expel you." You don't get it, Hermione, do you?" said Fred, smiling at her. "We don't care about staying anymore. We'd walk out right now if we weren't determined to do our bit for Dumbledore first. So anyway," he checked his watch, "Phase 1 is about to begin. I'd get in the Great Hall for lunch if I were you. That way the teachers will see you can't have had anything to do with it." "Anything to do with what?" said Hermione anxiously. "You'll see," said George. "Run along now." Fred and George turned away and disappeared in the swelling crowd, descending the stairs toward lunch. Looking highly disconcerted, Ernie muttered something about unfinished Transfiguration homework and scurried away. "I think we should get out of here, said Hermione nervously. "Just in case." "Yeah, all right," said Ron, and the three of them moved toward the doors to the Great Hall. But Harry had barely glimpsed today's ceiling of scudding white clouds when somebody tapped him on the shoulder, and turning, he found himself almost nose to nose with Filch, the caretaker. He took several hasty steps backward. Filch was best viewed at a distance. "The headmistress would like to see you, Potter," he leered. "I didn't do it," said Harry stupidly, thinking of whatever Fred and George were planning. Filch's jowls wobbled with silent laughter. "Guilty conscience, eh?" he wheezed. "Follow me." Harry glanced back at Ron and Hermione, who were both looking worried. He shrugged and followed Filch back into the entrance hall, against the tide of hungry students. Filch seemed to be in an extremely good mood. He hummed creakily under his breath as they climbed the marble staircase. As they reached the first landing, he said, "Things are changing around here, Potter." "I've noticed," said Harry coldly. "Yes, I've been telling Dumbledore for years and years he's too soft with you all," said Filch, chuckling nastily. "You filthy little beasts would never have dropped stink pellets if you'd known I'd had it in my power to whip you raw, would you now? Nobody would have thought of throwing fanged frisbees down the corridors if I could have strung you up by the ankles in my office, would they? But when Educational Decree 29 comes in, Potter, I'll be allowed to do them things. And she's asked the minister to sign an order for the expulsion of Peeves. Oh, things are going to be very different around here with her in charge." Umbridge had obviously gone to some lengths to get Filch on her side, Harry thought, and the worst of it was that he would probably prove an important weapon. His knowledge of the school's secret passageways and hiding places was probably second only to the Weasley twins. "Here we are," he said, leering down at Harry as he rapped 3 times upon Professor Umbridge's door and pushed it open. "The Potter boy to see you, ma'am." Umbridge's office was so very familiar to Harry from his many detentions, and was the same as usual except for the large wooden block lying across the front of her desk, on which golden letters spelled the word Headmistress. Also, his firebolt and Fred's and George's clean sweeps, which he saw with a pang, were now chained and padlocked to a stout iron peg in the wall behind the desk. Umbridge was sitting behind the desk, busily scribbling upon some of her pink parchment, but looked up and smiled widely at his entrance. "Thank you, Argus," she said sweetly. "Not at all, ma'am, not at all," said Filch, bowing as low as his rheumatism would permit, and exiting backward. "Sit," said Umbridge curtly, pointing toward a chair, and Harry sat. She continued to scribble for a few moments. He watched some of the foul kittens gamboling around the plates over her head, wondering what fresh horror she had in store for him. "Well now," she said finally, setting down her quill and looking like a toad about to swallow a particularly juicy fly, "what would you like to drink?" "What?" said Harry, quite sure he had misheard her. "To drink, Mr. Potter," she said, smiling still more widely. "Tea? Coffee? Pumpkin juice?" As she named each drink, she gave her short wand a wave, and a cup or glass of it appeared upon her desk. "Nothing, thank you," said Harry. "I wish you to have a drink with me," she said, her voice becoming more dangerously sweet. "Choose one." "Fine, tea then," said Harry, shrugging. She got up and made quite a performance of adding milk with her back to him. Then she bustled around the desk with it, smiling in sinisterly sweet fashion. "There," she said, handing it to him. "Drink it before it gets cold, won't you? Now, Mr. Potter, I thought we ought to have a little chat after the distressing events of last night." He said nothing. She settled herself back into her seat and waited. When several long moments had passed in silence, she said gaily, "You're not drinking up." He raised the cup to his lips and then, just as suddenly, lowered it. One of the horrible painted kittens behind Umbridge had great round blue eyes, just like Mad-Eye Moody's magical one, and it had just occurred to Harry what Mad-Eye would say if he ever heard that Harry had drunk anything offered by a known enemy. "What's the matter?" said Umbridge, who was still watching him. "Do you want sugar?" "No," said Harry. He raised the cup to his lips again and pretended to take a sip, though keeping his mouth tightly closed. Umbridge's smile widened. "Good," she whispered. "Very good. Now then," she leaned forward a little. "Where is Albus Dumbledore?" "No idea," said Harry promptly. Drink up," she said, still smiling. "Now, Mr. Potter, let us not play childish games. I know that you know where he has gone. You and Dumbledore have been in this together from the beginning. Consider your position, Mr. Potter." "I don't know where he is." Harry pretended to drink again. "Very well," said Umbridge, looking displeased. "In that case, you will kindly tell me the whereabouts of Sirius Black." Harry's stomach turned over and his hand holding the teacup shook so the cup rattled in its saucer. He tilted the cup to his mouth with his lips pressed together so that some of the hot liquid trickled down onto his robes. "I don't know," he said a little too quickly. "Mr. Potter," said Umbridge, "let me remind you that it was I who almost caught the criminal Black in the Gryffindor fire in October. I know perfectly well it was you he was meeting, and if I had had any proof, neither of you would be at large today. I promise you. I repeat, Mr. Potter, where is Sirius Black?" "No idea," said Harry loudly. "Haven't got a clue." They stared at each other so long that Harry felt his eyes watering. Then she stood up. "Very well, Potter. I will take your word for it this time, but be warned. The might of the Ministry stands behind me. All channels of communication in and out of this school are being monitored. A Flute Network regulator is keeping watch over every fire in Hogwarts, except my own, of course. My inquisitorial squad is opening and reading all owl posts entering and leaving the castle, and Mr. Filch is observing all secret passages in and out of the castle. If I find a shred of evidence, boom! The very floor of the office shook. Umbridge slipped sideways, clutching her desk for support, looking shocked. "What was—" She was gazing toward the door. Harry took the opportunity to empty his almost full cup of tea into the nearest vase of dried flowers. He could hear people running and screaming several floors below. "Back to lunch with you, Potter!" cried Umbridge, raising her wand and dashing out of the office. Harry gave her a few seconds' start, then hurried after her to see what the source of all the uproar was. It was not difficult to find. One floor down, pandemonium reigned. Somebody, and Harry had a very shrewd idea of who, had set off what seemed to be an enormous crate of enchanted fireworks. Dragons comprised entirely of green and gold sparks were soaring up and down the corridors, emitting loud fiery blasts and bangs as they went. Shocking pink Catherine wheels, 5 feet in diameter, were whizzing lethally through the air like so many flying saucers. Rockets with long tails of brilliant silver stars were ricocheting off the walls. Sparklers were writing swear words in midair of their own accord. Firecrackers were exploding like mines everywhere. Harry looked, and instead of burning themselves out, fading from sight, or fizzling to a halt, these pyrotechnical miracles seemed to be gaining in energy and momentum the longer he watched. Filch and Umbridge were standing, apparently transfixed with horror, halfway down the stairs. As Harry watched, one of the larger Catherine wheels seemed to decide that what it needed was more room to maneuver. It whirled toward Umbridge and Filch with a sinister whee! Both adults yelled with fright and ducked, and it soared straight out of the window behind them and off across the grounds. Meanwhile, several of the dragons and a large purple bat that was smoking ominously took advantage of the open door at the end of the corridor to escape toward the second floor. "Hurry, Filch, hurry!" shrieked Umbridge. "They'll be all over the school unless we do something! Stupefy!" A jet of red light shot out of the end of her wand and hit one of the rockets. Instead of freezing in midair, it exploded with such force that it blasted a hole in a painting of a soppy-looking witch in the middle of a meadow. She ran for it just in time, reappearing seconds later squashed into the painting next door, where a couple of wizards playing cards stood up hastily to make room for her. "Don't stun them, Filch!" shouted Umbridge angrily, for all the world as though it had been his suggestion. "Right you are, headmistress!" wheezed Filch, who was a squib and could no more have stunned the fireworks than swallowed them. He dashed to a nearby cupboard, pulled out a broom, and began swatting at the fireworks in midair. Within seconds, the head of the broom was ablaze. Harry had seen enough. Laughing, he ducked down low, ran to a door he knew was concealed behind a tapestry a little way along the corridor, and slipped through it to find Fred and George hiding just behind it, listening to Umbridge's and Filch's yells, and quaking with suppressed mirth. "Impressive," Harry said quietly, grinning. "Very impressive. You'll put Dr. Filibuster out of business, no problem." "Cheers. whispered George, wiping tears of laughter from his face. Oh, I hope she tries vanishing them next. They multiply by 10 every time you try. The fireworks continued to burn and to spread all over the school that afternoon. Though they caused plenty of disruption, particularly the firecrackers, the other teachers did not seem to mind them very much. Dear, dear, said Professor McGonagall sardonically as one of the dragons soared around her classroom, emitting loud bangs and exhaling flame. Miss Brown, would you mind running along to the headmistress and informing her that we have an escaped firework in our classroom? The upshot of it all was that Professor Umbridge spent her first afternoon as headmistress running all over the school, answering the summonses of the other teachers, none of whom seemed to be able to rid their rooms of the fireworks without her. When the final bell rang and the students were heading back to Gryffindor Tower with their bags, Harry saw with immense satisfaction a disheveled and soot-blackened Umbridge tottering sweaty-faced from Professor Flitwick's classroom. Thank you so much, Professor, said Professor Flitwick in his squeaky little voice. I could have gotten rid of the sparklers myself, of course, but I wasn't sure whether I had the authority. Beaming, he closed his classroom door in her snarling face. Fred and George were heroes that night in the Gryffindor common room. Even Hermione fought her way through the excited crowd around them to congratulate them. They were wonderful fireworks, she said admiringly. Thanks, said George, looking both surprised and pleased. Weasley's Wildfire Wigs Bangs! Only thing is, we used our whole stock. We're going to have to start again from scratch now. It was worth it, though, said Fred, who was taking orders from clamoring Gryffindors. If you want to add your name to the waiting list, Hermione, it's 5 gallons for your basic blaze box and 20 for the deflagration deluxe. Hermione returned to the table where Harry and Ron were sitting, staring at their school bags as though hoping their homework might spring out of it and start doing itself. Oh, why don't we have a night off? Said Hermione brightly as a silver-tailed Weasley rocket zoomed past the window. After all, the Easter holidays start on Friday. We'll have plenty of time then. Are you feeling all right? Ron asked, staring at her in disbelief. Now you mention it, said Hermione happily. Do you know, I think I'm feeling a bit rebellious. Harry could still hear the distant bangs of escape firecrackers when he and Ron went up to bed an hour later, and as he got undressed, a sparkler floated past the tower, still resolutely spelling out the word poo. He got into bed yawning. With his glasses off, the occasional firework still passing the window became blurred, looking like sparkling clouds, beautiful and mysterious against the black sky. He turned onto his side, wondering how Umbridge was feeling about her first day in Dumbledore's job, and how Fudge would react when he heard that the school had spent most of the day in a state of advanced disruption. Smiling to himself, he closed his eyes. The whizzes and bangs of escape fireworks in the grounds seemed to be growing more distant, or perhaps he, Harry, was simply speeding away from them. He had fallen right into the corridor leading to the Department of Mysteries. He was speeding toward the plain black door. Let it open. Let it open. It did. He was inside the circular room lined with doors. He crossed it, placed his hand upon an identical door, and it swung inward. Now he's in a long, rectangular room full of an odd mechanical clicking. There were dancing flecks of light on the walls, but he did not pause to investigate. He had to go on. There was a far door at the end. It, too, opened at his touch. And now he was in a dimly lit room as high and wide as a church, full of nothing but rows and rows of towering shelves, each laden with small, dusty, spun glass spheres. Now Harry's heart was beating fast with excitement. He knew where to go. He ran forward, but his footsteps made no noise in the enormous deserted room. There was something in this room he wanted very, very much. Something he wanted, or somebody else wanted. His scar was hurting. Bang! Harry awoke instantly, confused and angry. The dark dormitory was full of sound and laughter. Cool, said Seamus, who was silhouetted against the window. I think one of those captain wheels hit a rock and it's like they made it. Come and see. Harry heard Ron and Dean scramble out of bed for a better look. He lay there still and quite silent while the pain in his scar subsided and disappointment washed over him. He felt as though a wonderful treat had been snatched from him at the very last moment. He'd gotten so close that time. Glittering pink and silver winged piglets were now soaring past the windows of Gryffindor Tower. Harry lay and listened to the appreciative whoops of the Gryffindors in the dormitories below them. His stomach gave a sickening jolt as he remembered that he had occlumency the following evening. Harry spent the whole of the next day dreading what Snape was going to say if he found out how much farther into the Department of Mysteries he had penetrated during his last dream. With a surge of guilt, he realized that he had not practiced occlumency once since their last lesson. There had been too much going on since Dumbledore had left. He was sure he would not have been able to empty his mind even if he had tried. He doubted, however, whether Snape would accept that excuse. He attempted a little last-minute practice during classes that day, but it was no good. Hermione kept asking him what was wrong whenever he fell silent, trying to rid himself of all thought and emotion. And after all, the best moment to empty his brain was not while teachers were firing review questions at the class. Resigned to the worst, he set off for Snape's office after dinner. Halfway across the entrance hall, however, Cho came hurrying up to him. "Over here," said Harry, glad of a reason to postpone his meeting with Snape, and beckoning her across to the corner of the entrance hall where the giant hourglasses stood. Gryffindor's was now almost empty. "Are you okay? Umbridge hasn't been asking you about the DA, has she?" "Oh, no," said Cho hurriedly. "No, it was only... Well, I just wanted to say... Harry, I never dreamed Marietta would tell." "Yeah, well," said Harry moodily. He did feel Cho might have chosen her friends a bit more carefully. It was a small consolation that the last he heard, Marietta was still up in the hospital wing, and Madame Pomfrey had not been able to make the slightest improvement to her pimples. "She's a lovely person, really," said Cho. "She just made a mistake." Harry looked at her incredulously. "A lovely person who made a mistake? She sold us all out, including you." "Well, we all got away, didn't we?" said Cho pleadingly. "You know, her mom works for the Ministry. It's really difficult for her." "Ron's dad works for the Ministry too," Harry said furiously. "And in case you hadn't noticed, he hasn't got sneak written across his face." "That was a really horrible trick of Hermione Granger's," said Cho fiercely. She'd have told us that she jinxed that list." "I think it's a brilliant idea," said Harry coldly. Cho flushed and her eyes grew brighter. "Oh, yes. I forgot. Of course. It was darling Hermione's idea." "Don't start crying again," said Harry warningly. "I wasn't going to," she shouted. "Yeah, well, good," he said. "I've got enough to cope with at the moment." "Go and cope with it then," she said furiously, turning on her heel and stalking off. Fuming, Harry descended the stairs to Snape's dungeon, and though he knew from experience how much easier it would be for Snape to penetrate his mind if he arrived angry and resentful, he succeeded in nothing but thinking of a few more good things he should have said to Cho about Marietta before reaching the dungeon door. "You're late, Potter," said Snape coldly as Harry closed the door behind him. Snape was standing with his back to Harry, removing, as usual, certain of his thoughts and placing them carefully in Dumbledore's pensieve. He dropped the last silvery strand into the stone basin and turned to face Harry. "So," he said, "have you been practicing?" "Yes," Harry lied, looking carefully at one of the legs of Snape's desk. "Well, we'll soon find out, won't we?" said Snape smoothly. "Wand out, Potter." Harry moved into his usual position, facing Snape with the desk between them. His heart was pumping fast with anger at Cho and anxiety about how much Snape was about to extract from his mind. "On the count of 3, then," said Snape lazily. 1, 2... Snape's office door banged open and Draco Malfoy spit in. "Professor Snape, sir!" "Oh, sorry." Malfoy was looking at Snape and Harry in some surprise. "It's all right, Draco," said Snape, lowering his wand. "Potter is here for a little remedial potions." Harry had not seen Malfoy look so gleeful since Umbridge had turned up to inspect Hagrid. "I didn't know," he said, leering at Harry, who knew his face was burning. He would have given a great deal to be able to shout the truth at Malfoy, or even better, hit him with a good curse. "Well, Draco, what is it?" asked Snape. "It's Professor Umbridge, sir. She needs your help," said Malfoy. "They've found Montague, sir. He's turned up jammed inside a toilet on the 4th floor." "How did he get in there?" demanded Snape. "I don't know, sir. He's a bit confused." Very well, very well. "Potter," said Snape, "we shall resume this lesson tomorrow evening instead." He turned and swept from his office. Malfoy mouthed, "Remedial potions?" at Harry behind Snape's back before following him. Seething, Harry replaced his wand inside his robes and made to leave the room. At least he had 24 hours more in which to practice. He knew he ought to feel grateful for the narrow escape, though it was hard that it came at the expense of Malfoy telling the whole school that he needed remedial potions. He was at the office door when he saw it, a patch of shivering light dancing on the doorframe. He stopped, looking at it, reminded of something. Then he remembered it was like the little lights he had seen in his dream last night, the lights in the second room he had walked through on his journey through the Department of Mysteries. He turned around. The light was coming from the pensieve sitting on Snape's desk. The silver-white contents were ebbing and swirling within. Snape's thoughts. Things he did not want Harry to see if he broke through Snape's defenses accidentally. Harry gazed at the pensieve curiosity welling inside him. What was it that Snape was so keen to hide from Harry? The silvery lights shivered on the wall, Harry took 2 steps toward the desk, thinking hard. Could it possibly be information about the Department of Mysteries that Snape was determined to keep from him? Harry looked over his shoulder, his heart now pumping harder and faster than ever. How long would it take Snape to release Montague from the toilet? Would he come straight back to his office afterward, or accompany Montague to the hospital wing? Surely the latter. Montague was captain of the Slytherin Quidditch team. Snape would want to make sure he was all right. Harry walked the remaining few feet to the Pensieve and stood over it, gazing into its depths. He hesitated, listening, then pulled out his wand again. The office and the corridor beyond were completely silent. He gave the contents of the Pensieve a small prod with the end of his wand. The silvery stuff within began to swirl very fast. Harry leaned forward over it and saw that it had become transparent. He was, once again, looking down into a room as though it was through a circular window in the ceiling. In fact, unless he was much mistaken, he was looking down upon the Great Hall. His breath was actually fogging the surface of Snape's thoughts. His brain seemed to be in limbo. It would be insane to do the thing he was strongly tempted to do. He was trembling. Snape could be back at any moment. But Harry thought of Cho's anger, of Malfoy's jeering face, and a reckless daring seized him. He took a great gulp of breath and plunged his face into the surface of Snape's thoughts. At once, the floor of the office lurched, tipping Harry headfirst into the Pensieve. He was falling through cold blackness, spinning furiously as he went, and then he was standing in the middle of the Great Hall. But the 4 house tables were gone. Instead, there were more than 100 smaller tables, all facing the same way, at each of which sat a student, head bent low, scribbling on a roll of parchment. The only sound was the scratching of quills and the occasional rustle as somebody adjusted their parchment. It was clearly exam time. Sunshine was streaming through the high windows onto the bent heads, which shone chestnut and copper and gold in the bright light. Harry looked around carefully. Snape had to be here somewhere. This was his memory. And there he was, at a table right behind Harry. Harry stared. Snape the teenager had a stringy, pallid look about him, like a plant kept in the dark. His hair was lank and greasy and was flopping onto the table, his hooked nose barely half an inch from the surface of the parchment as he scribbled. He moved around behind Snape and reading the heading of the examination paper. Defense against the Dark Arts, ordinary wizarding level. So Snape had to be 15 or 16, around Harry's own age. His hand was flying across the parchment. He'd written at least a foot more than his closest neighbors, and yet his writing was minuscule and cramped. 5 more minutes! The voice made Harry jump. Turning, he saw the top of Professor Flitwick's head moving between the desks a short distance away. Professor Flitwick was walking past a boy with untidy black hair. Very untidy black hair. Harry moved so quickly that had he been solid, he would have knocked desks flying. Instead, he seemed to slide dreamlike across 2 aisles and up a third. The back of the black-haired boy's head drew nearer and nearer. He was straightening up now, putting down his quill, pulling his roll of parchment toward him so as to reread what he had written. Harry stopped in front of the desk and gazed down at his 15-year-old father. Excitement exploded in the pit of his stomach. It was as though he was looking at himself, but with deliberate mistakes. James' eyes were hazel. His nose was slightly longer than Harry's, and there was no scar on his forehead. But they had the same thin face, same mouth, same eyebrows. James's hair stuck up at the back exactly as Harry's did. His hands could have been Harry's, and Harry could tell that when James stood up, they would be within an inch of each other's heights. James yawned hugely and rumpled up his hair, making it even messier than it had been. Then, with a glance toward Professor Flitwick, he turned in his seat and grinned at a boy sitting 4 seats behind him. With another shock of excitement, Harry saw Sirius give James the thumbs up. Sirius was lounging in his chair at his ease, tilting it back on 2 legs. He was very good-looking. His dark hair fell into his eyes with a sort of casual elegance neither James's nor Harry's could ever have achieved, and a girl sitting behind him was eyeing him hopefully, though he didn't seem to have noticed. And 2 seats along from this girl, Harry's stomach gave another pleasurable squirm, was Remus Lupin. He looked rather pale and peaky. Was the full moon approaching? And was absorbed in the exam. As he reread his answers, he scratched his chin with the end of his quill, frowning slightly. So that meant Wormtail had to be around here somewhere too. And sure enough, Harry spotted him within seconds, a small mousy-haired boy with a pointed nose. Wormtail looked anxious. He was chewing his fingernails, staring down at his paper, scuffing the ground with his toes. Every now and then he glanced hopefully at his neighbor's paper. Harry stared at Wormtail for a moment, then back at James, who was now doodling on a bit of scrap parchment. He had drawn a snitch and was now tracing the letters L-E. What did they stand for? "Quills down, please," squeaked Professor Flitwick. "That means you too, Stebbins." Please remain seated while I collect your parchment. Accio! More than 100 rolls of parchment zoomed into the air and into Professor Flitwick's outstretched arms, knocking him backward off his feet. Several people laughed. A couple of students at the front desks got up, took hold of Professor Flitwick beneath the elbows, and lifted him to his feet again. Thank you, panted Professor Flitwick. Very well, everybody. You're free to go. Harry looked down at his father, who had hastily crossed out the L-E he had been embellishing, jumped to his feet, stuffed his quill and the exam question paper into his bag, which he slung over his back, and stood waiting for Sirius to join him. Harry looked around and glimpsed Snape a short way away, moving between the tables toward the doors into the entrance hall, still absorbed in his own examination paper. Round-shouldered, yet angular, he walked in a twitchy manner that recalled the spider, his oily hair swinging about his face. A gang of chattering girls separated Snape from James and Sirius, and by planting himself in the midst of this group, Harry managed to keep Snape in sight while straining his ears to catch the voices of James and his friends. "Do you like question 10, Moony?" asked Sirius as they emerged into the entrance hall. "Loved it," said Lupin briskly. "Give 5 signs that identify a werewolf." "Excellent question." "Do you think you managed to get all the signs?" said James in tones of mock concern. "Think I did," said Lupin seriously as they joined the crowd thronging around the front doors, eager to get out into the sunlit grounds. 1, he's sitting in my chair. 2, he's wearing my clothes. 3, his name is Remus Lupin. Wormtail was the only one who didn't laugh. "I got the snout shape, the pupils of the eyes, and the tufted tail," he said anxiously, "but I couldn't think of what else." "How thick are you, Wormtail?" said James impatiently. "You run around with a werewolf once a month." "Keep your voice down," implored Lupin. Harry looked anxiously behind him again. Snape remained close by, still buried in his examination questions. But this was Snape's memory, and Harry was sure that if Snape chose to wander off in a different direction, once outside in the grounds, he, Harry, would not be able to follow James any farther. To his intense relief, however, when James and his 3 friends strode off down the lawn toward the lake, Snape followed, still poring over the paper and apparently with no fixed idea of where he was going. By jogging a little ahead of him, Harry managed to maintain a close watch on James and the others. "Well, I thought that paper was a piece of cake," he heard Sirius say. "I'll be surprised if I don't get outstanding on it, at least." "Me too," said James. He put his hand in his pocket and took out a struggling golden snitch. "Where'd you get that?" "Nicked it," said James casually. He started playing with the snitch, allowing it to fly as much as a foot away and seizing it again. His reflexes were excellent. Wormtail watched him in awe. They stopped in the shade of the very same beech tree on the edge of the lake where Harry, Ron, and Hermione had spent a Sunday finishing their homework, and threw themselves down on the grass. Harry looked over his shoulder yet again and saw to his delight that Snape had settled himself on the grass in the dense shadows of a clump of bushes. He was as deeply immersed in the OWL paper as ever, which left Harry free to sit down on the grass between the beech and the bushes and watch the foursome under the tree. The sunlight was dazzling on the smooth surface of the lake, on the bank of which the group of laughing girls who had just left the great hall were sitting with shoes and socks off, cooling their feet in the water. Lupin had pulled out a book and was reading. Sirius stared around at the students milling over the grass, looking rather haughty and bored, but very handsomely so. James was still playing with the snitch, letting it zoom farther and farther away, almost escaping but always grabbed at the last second. Wormtail was watching him with his mouth open. Every time James made a particularly difficult catch, Wormtail gasped and applauded. After 5 minutes of this, Harry wondered why James didn't tell Wormtail to get a grip on himself. But James seemed to be enjoying the attention. Harry noticed his father had a habit of rumpling up his hair as though to make sure it did not get too tidy, and also that he kept looking over at the girls by the water's edge. "Put that away, will you?" said Sirius finally, as James made a fine catch and Wormtail let out a cheer, before Wormtail wets himself from excitement. Wormtail turned slightly pink, but James grinned. "If it bothers you," he said, stuffing the snitch back in his pocket. Harry had the distinct impression that Sirius was the only one for whom James would have stopped showing off. "I'm bored," said Sirius. "Wish it was the full moon." "You might," said Lupin darkly from behind his book. "We've still got Transfiguration. If you're bored, you could test me. Here." He held out his book. Sirius snorted. "I don't need to look at that rubbish. I know it all." "This'll liven you up, Padfoot," said James quietly. "Look who it is." Sirius's head turned. He had become very still, like a dog that has scented a rabbit. "Excellent," he said softly. "Snivellus." Harry turned to see what Sirius was looking at. Snape was on his feet again, and was stowing the OWL paper in his bag. As he emerged from the shadows of the bushes and set off across the grass, Sirius and James stood up. Lupin and Wormtail remained sitting. Lupin was still staring down at his book, though his eyes were not moving, and a faint frown line had appeared between his eyebrows. Wormtail was looking from Sirius and James to Snape with a look of avid anticipation on his face. "All right, Snivellus," said James loudly. Snape reacted so fast it was as though he had been expecting an attack. Dropping his bag, he plunged his hand inside his robes, and his wand was halfway into the air when James shouted, "Expelliarmus!" Snape's wand flew 12 feet into the air and fell with a little thud in the grass behind him. Sirius let out a bark of laughter. "Impedimenta!" he said, pointing his wand at Snape, who was knocked off his feet, halfway through a dive toward his own fallen wand. Students all around had turned to watch. Some of them had gotten to their feet and were edging nearer to watch. Some looked apprehensive, others entertained. Snape lay panting on the ground. James and Sirius advanced on him, wands up, James glancing over his shoulder at the girls at the water's edge as he went. Wormtail was on his feet now, watching hungrily, edging around Lupin to get a clearer view. "How'd the exam go, Snively?" said James. "I was watching him. His nose was touching the parchment," said Sirius viciously. "There will be great grease marks all over it. They won't be able to read a word." Several people watching laughed. Snape was clearly unpopular. Wormtail sniggered shrilly. Snape was trying to get up, but the jinx was still operating on him. He was struggling as though bound by invisible ropes. "You wait," he panted, staring up at James with an expression of purest loathing. "You wait." "Wait for what?" said Sirius coolly. "What are you going to do, Snively? Wipe your nose on us?" Snape let out a stream of mixed swear words and hexes, but his wand being 10 feet away, nothing happened. "Wash out your mouth," said James coldly. "Scourgify!" Pink soap bubbles streamed from Snape's mouth at once. The froth was covering his lips, making him gag, choking him. "Leave him alone!" James and Sirius looked around. James's free hand jumped to his hair again. It was one of the girls from the lake edge. She had thick, dark red hair that fell to her shoulders and startlingly green, almond-shaped eyes. Harry's eyes. Harry's mother. "All right, Evans," said James, and the tone of his voice was suddenly pleasant, deeper, more mature. "Leave him alone," Lily repeated. She was looking at James with every sign of great dislike. "What's he done to you?" "Well," said James, appearing to deliberate the point, "it's more the fact that he exists, if you know what I mean." Many of the surrounding watchers laughed, Sirius and Wormtail included, but Lupin, still apparently intent on his book, didn't, and neither did Lily. "You think you're funny," she said coldly, "but you're just an arrogant, bullying toe-rag, Potter. Leave him alone." "I will if you go out with me, Evans," said James quickly. "Go on. Go out with me, and I'll never lay a wand on old Snively again." Behind him, the impediment jinx was wearing off. Snape was beginning to inch toward his fallen wand, spitting out soap suds as he crawled. "I wouldn't go out with you if it was a choice between you and the giant squid," said Lily. "Bad luck, Prongs," said Sirius briskly, turning back to Snape. "Oi!" But too late. Snape had directed his wand straight at James. There was a flash of light and a gash appeared on the side of James's face, spattering his robes with blood. James whirled about. A second flash of light later, Snape was hanging upside down in the air, his robes falling over his head to reveal skinny, pallid legs and a pair of graying underpants. Many people in the small crowd watching cheered. Sirius, James, and Wormtail roared with laughter. Lily, whose furious expression had twitched for an instant as though she was going to smile, said, "Let him down!" "Certainly," and James jerked his wand upward. Snape fell into a crumpled heap on the ground, disentangling himself from his robes. He got quickly to his feet, wand up, but Sirius said, "Petrificus totalis!" and Snape keeled over once again, rigid as a board. "Leave him alone!" Lily shouted. She had her own wand out now. James and Sirius eyed it warily. "Ah, heavens! Don't make me hex you," said James earnestly. "Take the curse off him, then." James sighed deeply, then turned to Snape and muttered the counter-curse. "There you go," he said, as Snape struggled to his feet again. "You're lucky Evans was here, Snivellus." "I don't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her." Lily blinked. "Fine," she said coolly. "I won't bother in the future. I'd wash your pants if I were you, Snivellus." "Apologize to Evans!" James roared at Snape, his wand pointed threateningly at him. "I don't want you to make him apologize!" Lily shouted, rounding on James. "You're as bad as he is!" "What?" yelped James. "I'd never call you you-know-what! Messing up your hair because you think it looks cool to look like you've just got off your broomstick? Showing off with that stupid snitch? Walking down corridors and hexing anyone who annoys you just because you can? I'm surprised your broomstick can get off the ground with that fat head on it. You make me sick." She turned on her heel and hurried away. "Evans!" James shouted after her. "Hey, Evans!" But she didn't look back. "What is it with her?" said James, trying and failing to look as though this was a throwaway question of no real importance to him. "Reading between the lines, I say she thinks you're a bit conceited, mate," said Sirius. "Right," said James, who looked furious now. "Right." There was another flash of light, and Snape was once again hanging upside down in the air. "Who wants to see me take off Snively's pants?" But whether James really did take off Snape's pants, Harry never found out. A hand had closed tight on his upper arm, closed with a pincer-like grip. Wincing, Harry looked around to see who had hold of him, and saw with a thrill of horror a fully grown, adult-sized Snape standing right beside him, white with rage. Having fun. Harry felt himself rising into the air. The summer's day evaporated around him. He was floating upward through icy blackness. Snape's hand was still tight upon his arm. Then, with a swooping feeling as though he had turned head over heels in midair, his feet hit the stone floor of Snape's dungeon, and he was standing again beside the pensieve on Snape's desk in the shadowy present-day potion master's study. "So," said Snape, gripping Harry's arm so tightly that Harry's hand was starting to feel numb. "So, been enjoying yourself, Potter?" "No," said Harry, trying to free his arm. It was scary. Snape's lips were shaking. His face was white. His teeth were bared. "Amusing man, your father, wasn't he?" said Snape, shaking Harry so hard that his glasses slipped down his nose. I didn't..." Snape threw Harry from him with all his might. Harry fell hard onto the dungeon floor. "You will not tell anybody what you saw!" Snape bellowed. "No," said Harry, getting to his feet as far from Snape as he could. "No, of course I won't." "Get out! Get out! I don't want to ever see you in my office ever again!" And as Harry hurtled toward the door, a jar of dead cockroaches exploded over his head. He wrenched the door open and flew away up the corridor, stopping only when he had put 3 floors between himself and Snape. There he leaned against the wall, panting and rubbing his bruised arm. He had no desire at all to return to Gryffindor Tower so early, nor to tell Ron and Hermione what he had just seen. What was making Harry feel so horrified and unhappy was not being shouted at or having jars thrown at him. It was that he knew how it felt to be humiliated in the middle of a circle of onlookers, knew exactly how Snape had felt as his father had taunted him, and that judging from what he had just seen, his father had been every bit as arrogant as Snape had always told him. Chapter 29. Career Advice. "But why haven't you got occlumency lessons anymore?" said Hermione, frowning. "I've told you," Harry muttered. "Snape reckons I can carry on by myself now I've got the basics." "So you've stopped having funny dreams, then?" said Hermione skeptically. "Pretty much," said Harry, not looking at her. "Well, I don't think Snape should stop until you're absolutely sure you can control them," said Hermione indignantly. "Harry, I think you should go back and ask him." "No," said Harry forcefully. "Just drop it, Hermione, okay?" It was the first day of the Easter holidays, and Hermione, as was her custom, had spent a large part of the day drawing up study schedules for the 3 of them. Harry and Ron had let her do it. It was easier than arguing with her, and, in any case, they might come in useful. Ron had been startled to discover that there were only 6 weeks left until their exams. "How can that come as a shock?" Hermione demanded, as she tapped each little square on Ron's schedule with her wand, so that it flashed a different color according to its subject. "I don't know," said Ron. "There's been a lot going on." "Well, there you are," she said, handing him his schedule. "If you follow that, you should do fine." Ron looked down at it gloomily, but then brightened. "Oh, you give me an evening off every week." "That's for Quidditch practice," said Hermione. The smile faded from Ron's face. "What's the point?" he said. "We've got about as much chance of winning the Quidditch Cup this year as Dad's got of becoming Minister of Magic." Hermione said nothing. She was looking at Harry, who was staring blankly at the opposite wall of the common room, while Crookshanks pawed at his hand, trying to get his ears scratched. "What's wrong, Harry?" "What?" he said quickly. "Nothing." He seized his copy of Defensive Magical Theory and pretended to be looking something up in the index. Crookshanks gave him up as a bad job and slunk away under Hermione's chair. "I saw Cho earlier," said Hermione tentatively, and she looked really miserable too. "Have you two had a row again?" "What? Oh, yeah, we have," said Harry, seizing gratefully on the excuse. "What about?" "That sneak friend of hers, Marietta," said Harry. "Yeah, well, I don't blame you," said Ron angrily, setting down his study schedule. "If it hadn't been for her..." Ron went into a rant about Marietta Edgecombe, which Harry found helpful. All he had to do was look angry, nod, and say, "Yeah," and "That's right," whenever Ron drew breath, leaving his mind free to dwell, ever more miserably, on what he had seen in the pensieve. He felt as though the memory of it was eating him from the inside. He had been so sure that his parents had been wonderful people that he had never had the slightest difficulty in disbelieving Snape's aspersions on his father's character. Hadn't people like Hagrid and Sirius told Harry how wonderful his father had been? Yeah, well, look what Sirius was like himself, said a nagging voice inside Harry's head. He was as bad, wasn't he? Yes, he had once overheard Professor McGonagall saying that his father and Sirius had been troublemakers at school, but she had described them as forerunners of the Weasley twins, and Harry could not imagine Fred and George dangling someone upside down for the fun of it, not unless they really loathed them. Perhaps Malfoy, or somebody who really deserved it. Harry tried to make a case for Snape having deserved what he had suffered at James's hands, but hadn't Lily asked, "What's he done to you?" And hadn't James replied, "It's more the fact that he exists, if you know what I mean." Hadn't James started it all simply because Sirius said he was bored? Harry remembered Lupin saying back in Grimmauld Place that Dumbledore had made him prefect in the hope that he would be able to exercise some control over James and Sirius. But in the pensieve, he had sat there and let it all happen. Harry reminded himself that Lily had intervened. His mother had been decent, yet the memory of the look on her face as she had shouted at James disturbed him quite as much as anything else. She had clearly loathed James, and Harry simply could not understand how they could have ended up married. Once or twice he even wondered whether James had forced her into it. For nearly 5 years, the thought of his father had been a source of comfort, of inspiration. Whenever someone had told him he was like James, he had glowed with pride inside. And now he felt cold and miserable at the thought of him. The weather grew breezier, brighter, and warmer as the holidays passed. But Harry was stuck with the rest of the 5th and 7th years, who were all trapped inside, traipsing back and forth to the library. Harry pretended that his bad mood had no other cause but the approaching exams, and his fellow Gryffindors were sick of studying themselves. His excuse went unchallenged. "Harry, I'm talking to you. Can you hear me?" "Huh?" He looked around. Ginny Weasley, looking very windswept, had joined him at the library table where he had been sitting alone. It was late on Sunday evening. Hermione had gone back to Gryffindor Tower to review ancient runes. Ron had Quidditch practice. "Oh, hi," said Harry, pulling his books back toward him. "How come you're not at practice?" "It's over," said Ginny. "Ron had to take Jack Sloper up to the hospital wing." "Why?" "Well, we're not sure, but we think he knocked himself out with his own bat." She sighed heavily. "Anyway, a package just arrived. It's only just got through Umbridge's new screening process." She hoisted a box wrapped in brown paper onto the table. It had clearly been unwrapped and carelessly rewrapped, and there was a scribbled note across it in red ink, reading, "Inspected and passed by the Hogwarts High Inquisitor." "It's Easter eggs from Mum," said Ginny. "There's one for you. There you go." She handed him a handsome chocolate egg decorated with small iced snitches, and, according to the packaging, containing a bag of fizzing Whizbees. Harry looked at it for a moment, then, to his horror, felt a hard lump rise in his throat. "Are you okay, Harry?" asked Ginny quietly. "Yeah, I'm fine," said Harry gruffly. The lump in his throat was painful. He did not understand why an Easter egg should have made him feel like this. "You seem really down lately," Ginny persisted. "You know, I'm sure if you just talked to Cho—" "It's not Cho I want to talk to," said Harry brusquely. "Who is it then?" asked Ginny. He glanced around to make quite sure that nobody was listening. Madame Pince was several shelves away, stamping out a pile of books for a frantic-looking Hannah Abbott. "I wish I could talk to Sirius," he muttered, "but I know I can't." More to give himself something to do than because he really wanted any, Harry unwrapped his Easter egg, broke off a large bit, and put it into his mouth. "Well," said Ginny slowly, helping herself to a bit of egg too, "if you really want to talk to Sirius, I expect we could think of a way to do it." "Come on," said Harry hopelessly, "with Umbridge policing the fires and reading all our mail?" "The thing about growing up with Fred and George," said Ginny thoughtfully, "is that you sort of start thinking anything's possible if you've got enough nerve." Harry looked at her. Perhaps it was the effect of the chocolate. Lupin had always advised eating some after encounters with Dementors, or simply because he had finally spoken aloud the wish that had been burning inside him for a week, but he felt a bit more hopeful. "What do you think you're doing?" "Oh, damn," Ginny whispered, jumping to her feet. "I forgot." Madame Pince was swooping down upon them, her shriveled face contorted with rage. "Chocolate in the library!" she screamed. "Out! Out! Out!" She whipped out her wand, and she caused Harry's books, bag, and ink bottle to chase him and Ginny from the library, whacking them repeatedly over the head as they ran. As though to underline the importance of their upcoming examinations, a batch of pamphlets, leaflets, and notices concerning various wizarding careers appeared on the tables in Gryffindor Tower shortly before the end of the holidays, along with yet another notice on the board which read, "Career Advice. All fifth years will be required to attend a short meeting with their head of house during the first week of the summer term, in which they will be given the opportunity to discuss their future careers. Times of individual appointments are listed below." Harry looked down the list and found that he was expected in Professor McGonagall's office at 2:30 on Monday, which would mean missing most of divination. He and the other fifth years spent a considerable part of the weekend of the Easter break reading all the career information that had been left there for their perusal. "Well, I don't fancy healing," said Ron on the last evening of the holidays. He was immersed in a leaflet that carried the crossed bone and wand emblem of St. Mungo's on its front. "It says here you need at least an E at Newt level in potions, herbology, transfiguration, charms, and defense against the dark arts. I mean, blimey, don't want much, do they?" "Well, it's a very responsible job, isn't it?" said Hermione absently. She was poring over a bright pink and orange leaflet that was headed, "So you think you'd like to work in Muggle relations? You don't seem to need many qualifications to liaise with Muggles. All they want is an OWL in Muggle studies. Much more important is your enthusiasm, patience, and a good sense of fun." "You'd need more than a good sense of fun to liaise with my uncle," said Harry darkly. "Good sense of when to duck, more like." He was halfway through a pamphlet on wizard banking. "Listen to this. Are you seeking a challenging career involving travel, adventure, and substantial danger-related treasure bonuses? Then consider a position with Gringotts Wizarding Bank, who are currently recruiting Cursebreakers for thrilling opportunities abroad." "Oh, they want arithmancy, though. You could do it, Hermione." "I don't much fancy banking," said Hermione vaguely, now immersed in, "Have you got what it takes to train security trolls?" "Hey," said a voice in Harry's ear. He looked around. Fred and George had come to join them. "Jean's had a word with us about you," said Fred, stretching out his legs on the table in front of them and causing several booklets on careers with the Ministry of Magic to slide off onto the floor. "She says you need to talk to Sirius." "What?" said Hermione sharply, freezing with her hand halfway toward picking up Make a Bang of the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes. "Yeah," said Harry, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, I thought I'd like—" "Don't be so ridiculous," said Hermione, straightening up and looking at him as though she could not believe her eyes. "With Umbridge groping around in fires and frisking all the owls?" "Well, we think we can find a way around all that," said George, stretching and smiling. "It's a simple matter of causing a diversion. Now, you might have noticed that we've been rather quiet on the mayhem front during the Easter holidays." "What was the point, we asked ourselves, of disrupting leisure time?" continued Fred. "No point at all," we answered ourselves. "And of course we'd have messed up people studying too, which would be the very last thing we'd want to do." He gave Hermione a sanctimonious little nod. She looked rather taken aback by this thoughtfulness. "But it's business as usual from tomorrow," Fred continued briskly. "And if we're going to be causing a bit of an uproar, why not do it so that Harry can have his chat with Sirius?" "Yes, but still," said Hermione with an air of explaining something very simple to somebody very obtuse, "even if you do cause a diversion, how is Harry supposed to talk to him?" "Umbridge's office," said Harry quietly. He had been thinking about it for a fortnight and could think of no alternative. Umbridge herself had told him that the only fire that was not being watched was her own. "Are you insane?" said Hermione in a hushed voice. Ron had lowered his leaflet on jobs in the cultivated fungus trade and was watching the conversation warily. "I don't think so," said Harry, shrugging. "And how are you going to get there in the first place?" Harry was ready for this question. "Sirius's knife," he said. "Excuse me?" "Christmas before last, Sirius gave me a knife that'll open any lock," said Harry. "So even if she's bewitched the door so Alohomora won't work, which I bet she has—" "What do you think about this?" Hermione demanded of Ron, and Harry was reminded irresistibly of Mrs. Weasley appealing to her husband during Harry's first dinner in Grimmauld Place. I don't know," said Ron, looking alarmed at being asked to give an opinion. "If Harry wants to do it, it's up to him, isn't it?" "Spoken like a true friend in Weasley," said Fred, clapping Ron hard on the back. "Right then, we're thinking of doing it tomorrow, just after lessons, because it should cause maximum impact if everybody's in the corridors. Harry will set it off in the East Wing somewhere, draw her right out of her own office. I reckon we should be able to guarantee you, 20 minutes?" he said, looking at George. "Easy," said George. "What sort of diversion is it?" asked Ron. "You'll see, little bro," said Fred, as he and George got up again. "At least you will if you trot along to Gregory the Smarmy's corridor round about 5 o'clock tomorrow." Harry awoke very early the next day. feeling almost as anxious as he had done on the morning of his hearing at the Ministry of Magic. It was not only the prospect of breaking into Umbridge's office and using her fire to speak to Sirius that was making him feel nervous, though that was certainly bad enough. Today also happened to be the first time he would be in close proximity with Snape, since Snape had thrown him out of his office as they had potions that day. After lying in bed for a while thinking about the day ahead, Harry got up very quietly and moved across to the window beside Neville's bed, staring out on a truly glorious morning. The sky was a clear, misty, opalescent blue. Directly ahead of him, Harry could see the towering beech tree below, which his father had once tormented Snape. He was not sure what Sirius could possibly say to him that would make up for what he had seen in the Pensieve, but he was desperate to hear Sirius's own account of what had happened, to know of any mitigating factors there might have been, any excuse at all for his father's behavior. Something caught Harry's attention. Movement on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Harry squinted into the sun and saw Hagrid emerging from between the trees. He seemed to be limping. As Harry watched, Hagrid staggered to the door of his cabin and disappeared inside it. Harry watched the cabin for several minutes. Hagrid did not emerge again, but smoke furled from the chimney, so Hagrid could not be so badly injured that he was unequal to stoking the fire. Harry turned away from the window, headed back to his trunk, and started to dress. With the prospect of forcing entry into Umbridge's office ahead, Harry had never expected the day to be a restful one, but he had not reckoned on Hermione's almost continual attempts to dissuade him from what he was planning to do at 5 o'clock. For the first time ever, she was at least as inattentive to Professor Binns and History of Magic as Harry and Ron were, keeping up a stream of whispered admonitions that Harry tried very hard to ignore. And if she does catch you there, apart from being expelled, she'll be able to guess you've been talking to Snuffles, and this time I expect she'll force you to drink Veritaserum and answer her questions. Hermione, said Ron in a low, indignant voice, are you going to stop telling Harry off and listen to Binns, or am I going to have to take notes instead? You take notes for a change, it won't kill you. By the time they reached the dungeons, neither Harry nor Ron was speaking to Hermione any longer. Undeterred, she took advantage of their silence to maintain an uninterrupted flow of dire warnings, all uttered under her breath in a vehement hiss that caused Seamus to waste 5 whole minutes checking his cauldron for leaks. Snape, meanwhile, seemed to have decided to act as though Harry were invisible. Harry was, of course, well used to this tactic, as it was one of Uncle Vernon's favorites, and on the whole was grateful he had to suffer nothing worse. In fact, compared to what he usually had to endure from Snape in the way of taunts and snide remarks, he found the new approach something of an improvement, and was pleased to find that when left well alone, he was able to concoct an invigoration draught quite easily. At the end of the lesson, he scooped some of the potion into a flask, corked it, and took it up to Snape's desk for marking, feeling that he might at last have scraped an E. He had just turned away when he heard a smashing noise. Malfoy gave a gleeful yell of laughter. Harry whipped around again. His potion sample lay in pieces on the floor, and Snape was watching him with a look of gloating pleasure. Whoops, he said softly. Another 0 then, Potter. Harry was too incensed to speak. He strode back to his cauldron, intending to fill another flask and force Snape to mark it, but saw to his horror that the rest of the contents had vanished. I'm sorry, said Hermione with her hands over her mouth. I'm really sorry, Harry. I thought you'd finished, so I cleared up. Harry could not bring himself to answer. When the bell rang, he hurried out of the dungeon without a backward glance and made sure that he found himself a seat between Neville and Seamus for lunch so that Hermione could not start nagging him about using Umbridge's office again. He was in such a bad mood by the time he got to divination that he had quite forgotten his career appointment with Professor McGonagall, remembering only when Ron asked him why he wasn't in her office. He hurtled back upstairs and arrived out of breath only a few minutes later. Sorry, Professor, he panted as he closed the door. I forgot. No matter, Potter, she said briskly, but as she spoke, somebody else sniffed from the corner. Harry looked around. Professor Umbridge was sitting there, a clipboard on her knee, a fussy little pie frill around her neck, and a small, horribly smug smile on her face. Sit down, Potter, said Professor McGonagall tersely. Her hands shook slightly as she shuffled the many pamphlets littering her desk. Harry sat down with his back to Umbridge and did his best to pretend he could not hear the scratching of her quill on her clipboard. Well, Potter, this meeting is to talk over any career ideas you might have, and to help you decide which subjects you should continue into 6th and 7th years, said Professor McGonagall. Have you any thoughts about what you would like to do after you leave Hogwarts? Said Harry. He was finding the scratching noise from behind him very distracting. Yes, Professor McGonagall prompted Harry. Well, I thought of maybe being an Auror, Harry mumbled. You'd need top grades for that, said Professor McGonagall, extracting a small dark leaflet from under the mass on her desk and opening it. They ask for a minimum of 5 newts, and nothing under exceeds expectations grade. I see. Then you would be required to undergo a stringent series of character and aptitude tests at the Auror office. It's a difficult career path, Potter. They only take the best. In fact, I don't think anybody has been taken on in the last 3 years. At this moment, Professor Umbridge gave a very tiny cough, as though she was trying to see how quietly she could do it. Professor McGonagall ignored her. You'll want to know which subjects you ought to take, I suppose, she went on, talking a little more loudly than before. Yes, said Harry. Defense against the dark arts, I suppose. Naturally, said Professor McGonagall crisply. I would also advise... Professor Umbridge gave another cough, a little more audible this time. Professor McGonagall closed her eyes for a moment, opened them again, and continued as though nothing had happened. I would also advise transfiguration, because Aurors frequently need to transfigure or untransfigure their work. And I ought to tell you now, Potter, that I do not accept students into my NEWT classes unless they have exceeds expectations or higher at ordinary wizarding level. I'd say you're averaging acceptable at the moment, so you need to put in some good hard work before the exams to stand a chance of continuing. Then you ought to do charms, always useful, and potions. Yes, Potter, potions, she added with the merest flicker of a smile. Potions and antidotes are essential study for Aurors. And I must tell you that Professor Snape absolutely refuses to take students who get anything other than outstanding in their OWLs. So, Professor Umbridge gave her most pronounced cough yet. May I offer you a cough drop, Dolores? Professor McGonagall asked curtly without looking at Professor Umbridge. Oh, no, thank you very much, said Professor Umbridge with that simpering laugh Harry hated so much. I just wondered whether I could make the teensiest interruption, Minerva. I dare say you'll find you can, said Professor McGonagall through tightly gritted teeth. I was just wondering whether Mr. Potter has quite the temperament for an Auror, said Professor Umbridge sweetly. Were you? Said Professor McGonagall haughtily. Well, Potter, she continued, as though there had been no interruption, if you are serious in this ambition, I would advise you to concentrate hard on bringing your transfiguration and potions up to scratch. I see Professor Flitwick has graded you between acceptable and exceeds expectations for the last 2 years, so your charm work seems satisfactory. As for defense against the dark arts, your marks have been generally high. Professor Lupin, in particular, thought you... Are you quite sure you would like a cough drop, Dolores? Oh, no need for that. Thank you, Minerva, simpered Professor Umbridge, who had just coughed her loudest yet. I was just concerned that you might not have Harry's most recent defense against the dark arts marks in front of you. I'm quite sure I slipped in a note. What, this thing? Said Professor McGonagall in a tone of revulsion as she pulled a sheet of pink parchment from between the leaves of Harry's folder. She glanced down at it, her eyebrows slightly raised, then placed it back into the folder without comment. Yes, as I was saying, Potter, Professor Lupin thought you showed a pronounced aptitude for the subject, and obviously for an Auror. Did you not understand my note, Minerva? Asked Professor Umbridge in honeyed tones, quite forgetting to cough. Of course, I understood it, said Professor McGonagall, her teeth clenched so tightly that the words came out a little muffled. Well, then I'm confused. I'm afraid I don't quite understand how you can give Mr. Potter false hope. That false hope? Repeated Professor McGonagall, still refusing to look round at Professor Umbridge. He has achieved high marks in all his defense against the dark arts tests. I'm terribly sorry to have to contradict you, Minerva, but as you will see from my note, Harry has been achieving very poor results in his classes with me. I should have made my meaning plainer, said Professor McGonagall, turning at last to look Umbridge directly in the eyes. He has achieved high marks in all defense against the dark arts tests set by a competent teacher. Professor Umbridge's smile vanished as suddenly as a light bulb blowing. She sat back in her chair, turned a sheet on her clipboard, and began scribbling very fast indeed, her bulging eyes rolling from side to side. Professor McGonagall turned back to Harry, her thin nostrils flaring, her eyes burning. Any questions, Potter? Yes, said Harry. What sort of character and aptitude tests do the Ministry do on you, if you get enough newts? Well, you will need to demonstrate the ability to react well to pressure and so forth, said Professor McGonagall. Perseverance and dedication, because Auror training takes a further 3 years, not to mention very high skills in practical defense. It will mean a lot more study even after you've left school, so unless you're prepared to... I think you'll also find, said Umbridge, her voice very cold now, that the Ministry looks into records of those applying to be Aurors. They're criminal records. Unless you're prepared to take even more exams after Hogwarts, you should really look at another, which means that this boy has as much chance of becoming an Auror as Dumbledore has of ever returning to this school. A very good chance, then, said Professor McGonagall. Potter has a criminal record, said Umbridge loudly. Potter has been cleared of all charges, said Professor McGonagall even more loudly. Professor Umbridge stood up. She was so short that this did not make a great deal of difference, but her fussy, simpering demeanor had given place to a hard fury that made her broad, flabby face look oddly sinister. Potter has no chance whatsoever of becoming an Auror. Professor McGonagall got to her feet too, and in her case, this was a much more impressive move. She towered over Professor Umbridge. Potter, she said in ringing tones, I will assist you to become an Auror if it is the last thing I do. If I have to coach you nightly, I will make sure you achieve the required results. The Ministry of Magic will never employ Harry Potter, said Umbridge, her voice rising furiously. There may well be a new Minister of Magic by the time Potter is ready to join, shouted Professor McGonagall. Aha! Shrieked Professor Umbridge, pointing a stubby finger at McGonagall. Yes, of course. That's what you want, isn't it, Minerva McGonagall? You want Cornelius Fudge replaced by Albus Dumbledore. You think you'll be where I am, don't you? Senior Undersecretary to the Minister and Headmistress to boot. You are raving, said Professor McGonagall, superbly disdainful. Potter, that concludes our career consultation. Harry swung his bag over his shoulder and hurried out of the room, not daring to look at Umbridge. He could hear her and Professor McGonagall continuing to shout at each other all the way back along the corridor. Professor Umbridge was still breathing as though she had just run a race when she strode into their Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson that afternoon. I hope you thought better about what you were planning to do, Harry, Hermione whispered the moment they had opened their books to Chapter 34, Non-Retaliation and Negotiation. Umbridge looks like she's in a really bad mood already. Every now and then, Umbridge shot glowering looks at Harry, who had kept his head down, staring at defensive magical theory, his eyes unfocused, thinking. He could just imagine Professor McGonagall's reaction if he were caught trespassing in Professor Umbridge's office mere hours after she had vouched for him. There was nothing to stop him simply going back to Gryffindor Tower and hoping that sometime during the next summer holiday he would have a chance to ask Sirius about the scene he had witnessed in the Pensieve. Nothing, except that the thought of taking this sensible course of action made him feel as though a lead weight had dropped into his stomach. And then there was the matter of Fred and George, whose diversion was already planned, not to mention the knife Sirius had given him, which was currently residing in his school bag along with his father's old invisibility cloak. But the fact remained that if he were caught... Dumbledore sacrificed himself to keep you in school, Harry, whispered Hermione, raising her book to hide her face from Umbridge. And if you get thrown out today, it will all have been for nothing. He could abandon the plan and simply learn to live with the memory of what his father had done on a summer's day more than 20 years ago. And then he remembered Sirius in the fire upstairs in the Gryffindor common room. You're less like your father than I thought. The risk would have been what made it fun for James. But did he want to be like his father anymore? Harry, don't do it. Please don't do it, Hermione said in anguished tones as the bell rang at the end of class. He did not answer. He did not know what to do. Ron seemed determined to give neither his opinion nor his advice. He would not look at Harry, though when Hermione opened her mouth to try dissuading Harry some more, he said in a low voice, Give it a rest, okay? He can make up his own mind. Harry's heart beat very fast as he left the classroom. He was halfway along the corridor outside when he heard the unmistakable sounds of a diversion going off in the distance. There were screams and yells reverberating from somewhere above them. People exiting the classrooms all around Harry were stopping in their tracks and looking up at the ceiling fearfully. Then Umbridge came pelting out of the classroom as fast as her short legs would carry her. Pulling out her wand, she hurried off in the opposite direction. It was now or never. Harry, please, said Hermione weakly. But he had made up his mind. Hitching his bag more securely onto his shoulder, he set off at a run, weaving in and out of students, now hurrying in the opposite direction, off to see what all the fuss was about in the East Wing. Harry reached the corridor where Umbridge's office was situated and found it deserted. Dashing behind a large suit of armor whose helmet creaked around to watch him, he pulled open his bag, seized Sirius's knife, and donned the invisibility cloak. He then crept slowly and carefully back out from behind the suit of armor and along the corridor until he reached Umbridge's door. He inserted the blade of the magical knife into the crack around it and moved it gently up and down, then withdrew it. There was a tiny click, and the door swung open. He ducked inside the office, closed the door quickly behind him, and looked around. It was empty. Nothing was moving except the horrible kittens on the plates, continuing to frolic on the wall above the confiscated broomsticks. Harry pulled off his cloak and, striding over to the fireplace, found what he was looking for within seconds, a small box containing glittering Floo powder. He crouched down in front of the empty grate, his hands shaking. He had never done this before, though he thought he knew how it must work. Sticking his head into the fireplace, he took a large pinch of powder and dropped it onto the logs stacked neatly beneath him. They exploded at once into emerald green flames. "Number 12, Grimmauld Place," Harry said loudly and clearly. It was one of the most curious sensations he had ever experienced. He had traveled by Floo powder before, of course, but then it had been his entire body that had spun around and around in the flames through the network of wizarding fireplaces that stretched over the country. This time, his knees remained firm upon the cold floor of Umbridge's office, and only his head hurtled through the emerald fire. And then, abruptly as it had begun, the spinning stopped. Feeling rather sick and as though he was wearing an exceptionally hot muffler around his head, Harry opened his eyes to find that he was looking up out of the kitchen fireplace at the long wooden table where a man sat poring over a piece of parchment. "Sirius?" The man jumped and looked around. It was not Sirius, but Lupin. "Harry!" he said, looking thoroughly shocked. What's happened? Is everything all right?" "Yeah," said Harry. "I just wondered, I just fancied a chat with Sirius." I'll call him," said Lupin, getting to his feet, still looking perplexed. "He went upstairs to look for Kreacher. He seems to be hiding in the attic again." And Harry saw Lupin hurry out of the kitchen. Now he was left with nothing to look at but the chair and the table legs. He wondered why Sirius had never mentioned how very uncomfortable it was to speak out of the fire. His knees were already objecting painfully to their prolonged contact with Umbridge's hard stone floor. Lupin returned with Sirius at his heels moments later. "What is it?" said Sirius urgently, sweeping his long dark hair out of his eyes and dropping to the ground in front of the fire so that he and Harry were on a level. Lupin knelt down too, looking very concerned. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" "No," said Harry. "It's nothing like that. I just wanted to talk about my dad." They exchanged a look of great surprise, but Harry did not have time to feel awkward or embarrassed. His knees were becoming sorer by the second, and he guessed that 5 minutes had already passed from the start of the diversion. George had only guaranteed him 20. He therefore plunged immediately into the story of what he had seen in the Pensieve. When he had finished, neither Sirius nor Lupin spoke for a moment. Then Lupin said quietly, "I wouldn't like you to judge your father on what you saw there, Harry. He was only 15. "I'm 15, said Harry heatedly. "Look, Harry," said Sirius placatingly, "James and Snape hated each other from the moment they set eyes on each other. It was just one of those things. You can understand that, can't you? I think James was everything Snape wanted to be. He was popular, he was good at Quidditch, good at pretty much everything. And Snape was just this little oddball who was up to his eyes in the dark arts. And James, whatever else he may have appeared to you, Harry, always hated the dark arts." "Yeah," said Harry, "but he just attacked Snape for no good reason. Just because you said you were bored," he finished with a slightly apologetic note in his voice. "I'm not proud of it," said Sirius quickly. Lupin looked sideways at Sirius and then said, "Look, Harry, what you've got to understand is that your father and Sirius were the best in the school at whatever they did. Everyone thought they were the height of cool. If they sometimes got a bit carried away." "If we sometimes were arrogant little Burks, you mean," said Sirius. Lupin smiled. "He kept messing up his hair," said Harry in a pained voice. Sirius and Lupin laughed. "I'd forgotten he used to do that," said Sirius affectionately. "Was he playing with the snitch?" said Lupin eagerly. "Yeah," said Harry, watching uncomprehendingly as Sirius and Lupin beamed reminiscently. "Well, I thought he was a bit of an idiot." "Of course he was a bit of an idiot," said Sirius bracingly. "We were all idiots." "Well, not Moony so much," he said fairly, looking at Lupin, but Lupin shook his head. "Did I ever tell you to lay off Snape?" he said. "Did I ever have the guts to tell you that I thought you were out of order?" "Yeah, well," said Sirius, "you made us feel ashamed of ourselves. Sometimes. That was something." "And," said Harry doggedly, determined to say everything that was on his mind now he was here, "he kept looking over at the girls by the lake, hoping they were watching him." "Oh, well, he always made a fool of himself whenever Lily was around," said Sirius, shrugging. "He couldn't stop himself showing off whenever he got near her." "How come she married him?" Harry asked miserably. "She hated him." "Nah, she didn't," said Sirius. "She started going out with him in 7th year," said Lupin. "Once James had deflated his head a bit," said Sirius. "And stopped hexing people just for fun," said Lupin. "Even Snape?" said Harry. "Well," said Lupin slowly, Snape was a special case. I mean, he never lost an opportunity to curse James, so you couldn't really expect James to take that lying down, could you? And my mom was okay with that? She didn't know too much about it, to tell you the truth, said Sirius. I mean, James didn't take Snape on dates with her and jinx him in front of her, did he? Sirius frowned at Harry, who was still looking unconvinced. Look, he said, your father was the best friend I ever had, and he was a good person. A lot of people are idiots at the age of 15. He grew out of it. Yeah, okay, said Harry heavily. I just never thought I'd feel sorry for Snape. Now you mention it, said Lupin, a faint crease between his eyebrows. How did Snape react when he found you'd seen all this? He told me he'd never teach me occlumency again, said Harry indifferently. Like, that's a big disappointment. He what? Shouted Sirius, causing Harry to jump and inhale a mouthful of ashes. Are you serious, Harry? Said Lupin quickly. He's stopped giving you lessons? Yeah, said Harry, surprised at what he considered a great overreaction. But it's okay, I don't care. It's a bit of a relief to tell you that I'm coming there to have a word with Snape, said Sirius forcefully, and he actually made to stand up, but Lupin wrenched him back down again. If anyone's going to tell Snape, it will be me, he said firmly. But Harry, first of all, you're to go back to Snape and tell him on no account is he to stop giving you lessons. When Dumbledore hears, I can't tell him that he'd kill me, said Harry, outraged. You didn't see him when we got out of the Pensieve. Harry, there is nothing so important as you learning occlumency, said Lupin sternly. Do you understand me? Nothing. Okay, said Harry, thoroughly discomposed, not to mention annoyed. I'll try and say something to him, but it won't be... He fell silent. He could hear distant footsteps. Is that creature coming downstairs? No, said Sirius, glancing behind him. It must be somebody on your end. Harry's heart skipped several beats. I better go, he said hastily, and he pulled his head backward out of Grimmauld Place's fire. For a moment his head seemed to be revolving on his shoulders, and then he found himself kneeling in front of Umbridge's fire, with his head firmly back on, watching the emerald flames flicker and die. Quickly, he heard a wheezy voice mutter right outside the office door. She's left it open. Harry dived for the invisibility cloak and had just managed to pull it back over himself when Filch burst into the office. He looked absolutely delighted about something and was talking to himself feverishly as he crossed the room, pulled open a drawer in Umbridge's desk, and began rifling through the papers inside it. Approval for whipping. I can do it at last. They've had it coming to them for years. He pulled out a piece of parchment, kissed it, then shuffled rapidly back out the door, clutching it to his chest. Harry leapt to his feet, and making sure that he had his bag and the invisibility cloak was completely covering him, he wrenched open the door and hurried out of the office after Filch, who was hobbling along faster than Harry had ever seen him go. One landing down from Umbridge's office, and Harry thought it was safe to become visible again. He pulled off the cloak, shoved it in his bag, and hurried onward. There was a great deal of shouting and movement coming from the entrance hall. He ran down the marble staircase and found what looked like most of the school assembled there. It was just like the night when Trelawney had been sacked. Students were standing all around the walls in a great ring, some of them, Harry noticed, covered in a substance that looked very like stink sap. Teachers and ghosts were also in the crowd. Prominent among the onlookers were members of the Inquisitorial Squad, who were all looking exceptionally pleased with themselves, and Peeves, who was bobbing overhead, gazed down upon Fred and George, who stood in the middle of the floor with the unmistakable look of two people who had just been cornered. So, said Umbridge triumphantly, whom Harry realized was standing just a few stairs in front of him, once more looking down upon her prey. So, you think it amusing to turn a school corridor into a swamp, do you? Pretty amusing, yeah, said Fred, looking back up at her without the slightest sign of fear. Filch elbowed his way closer to Umbridge, almost crying with happiness. I've got the form, headmistress, he said hoarsely, waving the piece of parchment Harry had just seen him take from her desk. I've got the form. I've got the whips waiting. Oh, let me do it now. Very good, Arcus, she said. You two, she went on, gazing down at Fred and George, are about to learn what happens to wrongdoers in my school. You know what? Said Fred. I don't think we are. He turned to his twin. George, said Fred, I think we've outgrown full-time education. Yeah, I've been feeling that way myself, said George lightly. Time to test our talents in the real world, do you reckon? Asked Fred. Definitely, said George. And before Umbridge could say a word, they raised their wands and said together, Accio Brooms! Harry heard a loud crash somewhere in the distance. Looking to his left, he ducked just in time. Fred and George's broomsticks, one still trailing the heavy chain and iron peg with which Umbridge had fastened them to the wall, were hurtling along the corridor toward their owners. They turned left, streaked down the stairs, and stopped sharply in front of the twins, the chain clattering loudly on the flagged stone floor. "We won't be seeing you," Fred told Professor Umbridge, swinging his leg over the broomstick. "Yeah, don't bother to keep in touch," said George, mounting his own. Fred looked around at the assembled students and at the silent, watchful crowd. "If anybody fancies buying a portable swamp as demonstrated upstairs, come to number 93 Diagon Alley. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes," he said in a loud voice. "Our new premises. Special discounts to Hogwarts students who swear they're going to use our products to get rid of this old bat," added George, pointing to Professor Umbridge. "Stop them!" shrieked Umbridge, but it was too late. As the Inquisitorial squad closed in, Fred and George kicked off from the floor, shooting 15 feet into the air, the iron peg swinging dangerously below. Fred looked across the hall at the poltergeist bobbing on his level above the crowd. "Give her hell from us, Peeves." And Peeves, whom Harry had never seen take an order from a student before, swept his belled hat from his head and sprang to a salute as Fred and George wheeled about to tumultuous applause from the students below and sped out of the open front doors into the glorious sunset.